Hey, greetings everybody. Gleekon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, the Proto-Dragons kind of had escaped from the fight, or really at least three of them had, and those three went off into a cave where Tyr was there, and he kind of like waved the artifact at Malygos, Ysera, and Alexstrasza, while Neltharion and Nosdormu fought off the big Galakron. So now they're back. They rejoined the battle. They're bringing it to him, but it didn't go well. Tyr helped him out in a giant avatar form and beat him back, and now they're kind of running. So stay a while and listen to Chapter 4 of Part 4 as we get nearer and nearer to the ending section of this this e-novel, Dawn of the Aspects. This is called Within the Nexus. Jaina glared at the offending books. She had exhausted a repertoire of spells designed for such delicate searches to no avail. Now the Archmage considered stronger measures, her only hesitation being that Modera or someone else would certainly notice her presence then. Still, every second lost might also mean further danger to Kalec. She had to take the risk of discovery. Her mind made up, Jaina began casting and then halted. Atop one bookcase sat the skull of an ancient savage reptile that she had inherited with a number of unusual and arcane objects from her predecessor Ronin. While in itself it meant nothing to Jaina, it caused her mind to shift back abruptly to the huge skeleton and her encounter with Bunique. She saw again how the Tonka drew out the pattern. Only at this moment did Jaina ponder the fact that the Tonka had a very precise memory for a symbol like nothing she would have seen before. At the time, the Archmage had chalked it up to the focused nature of Bunique's kind, but now she wondered if it had been something more. "Were you really a Tonka?" Jaina asked the distant Bunique. "I shouldn't have believed it coincidence." Jaina drew the symbol in the air. She then turned it about so that she looked at it as it had been drawn by the hunter. "What a fool I've been!" the Archmage blurted. She bit her lip, then simply prayed that no one had heard her. She eyed the reversed symbol, seeing it anew. Had she paid more attention when first seeing it by the skeleton, Jaina would have noticed that turning it revealed a different and obvious meaning. Turned this way, the symbol was also a key, or rather the key. Jaina cast the reversed symbol over the original tome. The Archmage watched as it sank into the book. The lavender glow faded not only from the book in question, but also from the entire collection. Jaina seized the thick tome and began flipping through the pages. There, where she had expected to find the information she needed, she finally found it. The Archmage carefully read over the passage. When together, the two parts were more than the sum of their individual measure, their power magnified. Archmage Wendell suggested that there were also other combinations that the pair could make, but that the immense time since their creation had caused some of those combinations to function in error. Jaina shut the book. Yes, that must be it. Voices arose outside her chambers. Jaina quietly swore at her outbursts. She should have known that Modera would have someone listening for any sign of her return. But discovery mattered no longer. Jaina believed that she had what she needed. The Archmage set down the book and vanished. She materialized a few seconds later, just beyond the magical boundaries of the Nexus, the humming accompanying her teleportation spell fading away even as she registered her location. Jaina frowned upon seeing where she had appeared. The Archmage was far from her intended goal. She cast another spell and vanished again. Jaina rematerialized in the exact same location. Staring at the Nexus, the Archmage attempted a different tack. This time she simply tried to probe what was currently happening. The probe failed to breach the Nexus's protective wards. Having entered the sanctum just recently, Jaina believed that Kalec had adjusted the wards to keep someone or something out. That was followed with the concern that he had wanted her specifically to be kept from entering. He had already sought to keep his troubles from her, and it could be reasonably assumed that this change in the wards had been done with that intention in mind. The trouble was, Jaina believed that she held Kalec's only hope of being freed from whatever the artifact was doing to him. If he had sealed the Nexus off, it was possible he had condemned himself. "Now I will not lose you." Jaina cast another spell, this one draping over the entire field of wards. She looked for some fault, however slight, of which she could take advantage. Unfortunately, she found none. Yeah, but he's not the one that is keeping people out. The blue dragons themselves aside, few alive understood the complexities of the Nexus's wards as well as Jaina Proudmoore did. Aware of their general matrix, Jaina sought out the key points. She did so not to seek weaknesses but to find alterations. By understanding what had been changed, the Archmage might be able to see how she could adjust it to her desire. But what Jaina discovered when she located the key points was not what she expected. Kalec had not made these alterations. The same energy signatures she had noted in the artifact now permeated the Nexus's defensive network. At first, the Archmage stood daunted, but then an idea occurred to her. She recreated the symbol and, keeping it reversed as she had done with the books, incorporated it into her next probe of the key wards. There was resistance, but the symbol finally imposed itself on the altered wards. As it did, the artifact's influence on that area faded. Encouraged, Jaina probed deeper. The alteration reconstructed itself in the process, projecting her spellwork from the wards. The force with which it reversed matters struck Jaina's mind hard. Gasping, the Archmage fell to one knee. Her head throbbed. However, her initial frustration at this setback quickly changed to curiosity. What she had sensed was no personal purpose on the part of the artifact. It had simply restored an area that had been disrupted. There had been no malice, no intentional attack on the Archmage. Once the area had been returned to its previous state, the artifact's efforts had ceased. Standing, Jaina grimly smiled. She had a better idea of what she faced. Next, she had to learn its limits, and whether those limits were greater than her own. With Kalec in her thoughts, the Archmage once more recreated the symbol. She then made a second, a third, and so on until, within the space of a few breaths, scores of the reversed image hovered before her. "Let's see what happens now," Jaina murmured. "Let's see what happens when you have to readjust everything." She sent her army of glowing symbols into the air. They hovered together for a moment, then spread out, circling the expanse of the Nexus and its unseen protective wards. When they reached where Jaina wanted them to be, the Archmage had them pause just beyond the wards. Heightening her senses, she took one last look at how the wards were arranged, then sent a sigil, hurtling toward each. As the reverse symbols touched the wards, the Nexus erupted in an explosion of white and lavender energy. The 5 proto-dragons alighted on a set of sharp ridges along the side of a wide, stark peak. All were extremely exhausted, and had Galakron chosen that moment to attack them, Malygos had little doubt that he and his friends would have been easy morsels for the behemoth. Kalec, experiencing Malygos' weariness and foul mood, could not help but think the same. For several minutes the 5 simply crouched where they perched, caught in their own thoughts, but all clearly having the same thoughts. The devastation wrought by Galakron had begun to sink in, as had the fact that they seemed to be the only ones left to face him. More and more, the immensity of that was becoming apparent. The mountain wind howled, but Malygos suddenly heard another sound mixed in with it. Stirring, the icy blue male listened, but noted only the wind now. Kalec's host saw that Ysera also listened. She did not look Malygos' way, but rather at where 2 mountains to the east seemed as if they fell toward each other. Again there came a brief sound. This time Malygos recognized the mournful hiss of a proto-dragon. Ysera flew off toward the sound. The others took notice of her action, but evidently had not heard the cry. Malygos immediately followed with the rest in pursuit. Ysera dived in between the 2 mountains. Malygos pushed to keep up with her, amazed that the weaker female now had more strength than he did. The yellowish proto-dragon entered a shadowed area that reminded Kalec and his host too much of the very region they had just left. Visions of animated corpses rose in both minds. Alexstrasza's sister vanished into the shadows. Malygos slowed slightly, then entered. Barely had he done so when another proto-dragon rose in front of him. Despite the shadows, it was clear to Malygos that this was a living creature, not one of the undead. The 2 collided, but not because the other proto-dragon, a young male, sought battle. Malygos' supposed opponent squawked in fear as he tried to untangle himself. The third proto-dragon, Alexstrasza, joined from behind Malygos. Ysera's sibling aided Malygos in pinning the young proto-dragon against one rocky wall. As they did, Ysera joined them. "No, he was only startled. Let him go." The captured male frantically looked from Malygos to Ysera and back again. He let out a low whine. Only then did Malygos realize that this was one of the lesser proto-dragons, one of those that had not made the leap to intelligence. From behind Ysera arose more whining. Malygos caught sight of several shapes moving about in the back. Neltharion and Nosdormu landed near them. At the same time, Alexstrasza released her hold on the captured proto-dragon. Malygos did the same. The young male immediately rushed back behind Ysera. He vanished among the other shadowy forms, all of which grew even more agitated. "What is this?" Neltharion muttered. Ysera turned to the shadows. Malygos and the others finally followed. The agitated forms turned out to be a motley collection of proto-dragons, which Kalec and his host saw included mostly the lesser ones, but also a few of the obviously more intelligent. Whichever they were, they shared a tremendous anxiety. Among them, Malygos spotted two whom he recognized from the doomed charge. They looked even more disheveled than the lesser proto-dragons, and in some manner also more anxious. Eyeing the smarter ones, Malygos came to the conclusion that they were probably all from the charge. "Galakron comes! Galakron comes!" a silver-blue female cried without warning. The assembled survivors grew yet more agitated. "No Galakron!" Neltharion roared with impatience. "No Galakron! Quiet!" They quieted, but only out of a more immediate fear of the charcoal-gray male. Neltharion's outburst also greatly shook Ysera. She placed herself between the unfortunates and Neltharion. "You be quiet! Quiet!" Startled, Neltharion clamped his mouth shut and backed down. Ysera, her eyes widening by the second, turned to the shivering proto-dragons. "All good," she continued in a calmer tone. "No Galakron. All good." Her audience became less restive, but did not completely calm. Kalec, observing all, could hardly blame them. Those who had been a part of Talonix's campaign would live with the horror of the debacle for the rest of their existence. Very possibly a short time unless something changed. "So many dead," Ysera muttered. "So many dead." Alexstrasza came to her side. "Sister!" "Galakron, we must—" Kalec's world turned on its head. The vision changed to darkness with a suddenness that jarred the blue dragon as none of the previous shifts had. He felt as if his mind were being torn in 1,000 different directions. What at first sounded like the rapid beating of his own heart pounding in his head quickly became a steady noise that he realized originated from beyond his ears. In understanding that, Kalec also understood that he was somewhat back in his body. Why he had not completely left the vision for the present, the blue dragon could not say. Kalec tried to move, but it was still as if he was a part of young Malygos. Kalec had no sense of his legs and arms, no sense of any part of his body except that if he could hear the pulsating, then he did have ears. Then an indistinct shape caught his attention. Kalec found himself grateful that it also revealed that he did still have eyes. He tried to identify, but could only make out that it stood over him. The pulsating increased, again causing him tremendous strain. He wanted to shut his eyes and hold his hands to his ears. And as if he had done the latter, the beat grew muffled, distant. As the intensity faded, Kalec felt the world slowly try to coalesce about him. With it came some semblance of form to the shape looming over Kalec. The shape was clad in a hooded cloak like the one Tyr had been wearing. Kalec tried to speak, but no words escaped him. Frustrated, he threw all of his will into making some sound. His ears resounded with the bellowing cry of a dragon, his own cry, despite the fact that he awoke in his humanoid form. Kalec gritted his teeth and then took satisfaction in not only being able to do that, but also having finally made himself heard. Details started to come into view around the vague form that might be Tyr, details that Kalec recognized from the interior of the Nexus, and among them, naturally, was the artifact. That it was so nearby did not surprise him. He was relieved to find that the artifact had not sent him flying halfway across Azeroth, but wondered why he still heard the pulsating. There was no reason for the Nexus to have such a sound coursing through it. Yes, some of the wards set off warnings of a magical nature, but this was not one of those alarms. Even as that came to mind, it suddenly occurred to Kalec that the vague form no longer stood over him. He glared at the empty air, then forced himself to his feet. As he did, he sensed the influence of the artifact extending through the entire arrangement of wards as if it sought to alter everything anew. No, as he fought to focus better, Kalec noticed that there was a difference in the way the artifact's power flowed. It was not simply seeking to alter things, it was attempting to correct abrupt changes made to the wards from the outside. But who would have the audacity? "Jaina," he whispered, both hoping it was her and praying it was not. She could not possibly have any idea what was happening within, so Kalec believed, And even if somehow she had gained some knowledge, Jaina still risked herself needlessly. There was nothing she could do for Kalec. More fearful for her life than for his own fragmenting sanity, Kalec stumbled forward. He heard an ominous rumble echoing through the Nexus which struck his very core. Galakron. It was not possible for the proto-dragon to be there. Kalec knew that with absolute certainty. Yet again he heard Galakron's distinctive rumble, this time closer than ever. A shadow crossed over Kalec, a vast shadow that only served to verify that what he had heard was indeed fact. However, when he tried to spot the source of that shadow, he could locate no sign. The Nexus shook, but the tremor had nothing to do with shadows of the past. Whatever was affecting the wards from without had caused greater turmoil to his sanctum than Kalec would have expected. More and more he believed that Jaina had come in search of him, and more he feared what the artifact might choose to do with her. Kalec staggered toward the accursed relic. Another shadow moved over it, a smaller one. The vague form stood behind the artifact, its hooded gaze fixed on Kalec. "What do you want from me?" he shouted. "What?" A rasping hiss from his right made Kalec quickly turn. Out of the corner of his eye he thought he saw one of the undead proto-dragons, but when Kalec sought out the monster, it, like Galakron, was nowhere to be seen. And neither, when Kalec turned back, was the hooded figure. Fury rising, the former aspect reached for the artifact. Around him the pulsating grew stronger, deafening. That brought to mind Jaina again, which only further stirred Kalec toward the relic. If only for her he needed to find some manner by which to stop it. "We must stop him here and now. Any longer and I fear for this world." Tyr's voice. Kalec knew it very well at this point. He wanted to curse the Keeper, but no words came from the blue dragon's mouth this time. Galakron's roar filled his ears again. As before, the vast shadows swept over him and the chamber. "I've observed him long enough. I think I have discovered 2 weak points that we can exploit." "I do not." Kalec could not finish. Nor could he reach the damned relic. He fell to his knees and then, still grasping for the octagonal artifact, pitched forward. But instead of falling, Kalec awoke in what he recognized as the same region where Malagos, Ysera, and the others had come across the survivors from the charge. Concerns about Jaina and the Nexus faded, despite the Blue Dragon's best efforts. His mind and that of the young Malagos melded again. And through his host, Kalec instantly understood that they had not come across the ragged group by chance. Tyr had sent them in that precise direction because he had known that they would discover one of the bands hiding from Galakron's horrific gluttony. If it had not been this one, it would have been another group. And now Tyr stood among the 5, a hint of weariness in his tone, but weariness mixed with confidence. How he had evaded Galakron he had apparently not told the proto-dragons. Instead, what he appeared to be doing was organizing Malagos and the others for another mad attempt at taking on Galakron. What was worse to Kalec was that the proto-dragons were listening, especially Ysera. Where is he now?" she demanded. "The icy peaks over the North Ridge." Kalec found the description maddeningly vague, but his host and the rest nodded as if they knew the area very well. An image of the peaks in question briefly formed in Malagos's thoughts. Kalec tried to identify them with some area in Northrend, but the image faded before he could do so. Ysera leaned closer to Tyr. "We go now?" "What does Galakron do now?" Nosdormu interjected. "What?" "He sleeps," Tyr answered solemnly. "He sleeps deep. Now is the time to attack him. We shall never get a better chance, in fact." None of the proto-dragons, not even Malagos, seemed to notice a slight hesitation at the end of Tyr's statement. Kalec wondered if it meant anything, or if Tyr was simply still exhausted from his own efforts. "There is a river nearby," the Keeper continued, "flush with fish. Go there, eat your fill. Then we head north for Galakron." Alexstrasza indicated the huddled survivors. "What about these?" "They will be no help." Neltharion grunted in agreement. He looked at Malagos, who nodded. Kalec's host had no other plan and trusted in Tyr's intelligence. Tyr would lead them to victory. Neltharion spread his wings, but before he could take flight, Tyr reached into his cloak and to Kalec's tremendous frustration brought forth the artifact. He held it toward the charcoal gray male. As before, it glowed, startling Neltharion. Tyr held it near Nosdormu, who simply waited for it to stop glowing. Neltharion snorted at the brown male. "We go now?" a more impatient Ysera asked. "Yes, the river first. I will meet you after." No sooner had Tyr said that than he no longer stood among them. Now only Malygos did not react. Kalec did react, although of course no one saw that, and no one evidently saw what he reacted to. Kalec might have been wrong about the earlier hesitation, but he could not have been wrong about the wary gaze Tyr had given before disappearing. And Kalec was certain he could not be imagining that, whatever the reason for the gaze, it warned of a threat not just to Malygos and his friends, but to everything. And now what's even cooler is that all 5 have been, scanned, imbued by the artifact. I definitely think my theory is correct, and that's what made them into the aspects. All right, cool. We got another episode in the pipe, 5x5. We're getting really close. We got one more chapter in the 4th part, and then we'll start our finale section. Thanks, everybody, for watching and for listening, and I will see you next time on Lore of Warcraft.